There's a pattern in monetary history that has destroyed every reserve currency in the last 500 years. 9 stages that appear in sequence. And when all 9 stages complete, the reserve currency collapses and a new one takes its place. This isn't theory. This is documented historical fact across 5 centuries. The Portuguese real dominated global trade in the 1500s. It followed all 9 stages and collapsed. The Spanish silver dollar was the world's currency for 2 centuries. It followed all 9 stages and collapsed. The Dutch guilder was the reserve currency of the 1600s and 1700s. 9 stages, collapsed. The British pound ruled the world for a century. 9 stages, collapsed in 1971. And now the US dollar, the reserve currency since 1944. 80 years of dominance. And right now in 2025, the dollar is at stage 8 of 9. Stage 8 is rapid decline. It's when other nations actively move away from the currency. When reserves fall faster than anyone expected. When the system that seemed permanent starts cracking. Stage 9 is collapse. It's when a new reserve currency emerges and the old one becomes just another currency. No special privileges, no ability to print unlimited money, just a normal currency of a normal country. And the gap between stage 8 and stage 9? Historically, 5 to 15 years. The British pound entered stage 8 in 1945. By 1971, it was over, 26 years. The dollar entered stage 8 around 2020, when the petrodollar system started breaking. We're 5 years in, which means we have somewhere between 0 and 10 years before stage 9. Before the dollar loses reserve currency status. Before America can't print unlimited money anymore. Before the financial privilege that built modern America disappears. This is the story of how reserve currencies actually die. The 9 stages that have repeated 5 times over 5 centuries. And why the United States dollar is following the same pattern that destroyed every reserve currency before it. Before we go through the pattern, you need to understand what a reserve currency is and why it gives a country enormous power. A reserve currency is the currency that other countries hold in their reserves and use for international trade. It's the currency that becomes the global standard. When countries trade with each other, they use the reserve currency. When they hold foreign exchange reserves, they hold the reserve currency. When commodities like oil are priced globally, they're priced in the reserve currency. Being the reserve currency gives a country 3 massive advantages. First, unlimited borrowing power. If your currency is the reserve, other countries need to hold it, which means they buy your government bonds. Which means you can borrow essentially unlimited amounts at low interest rates because there's always demand. The United States has borrowed $36 trillion. We can do this because the world needs dollars, so they buy treasury bonds. Second, you can run trade deficits forever. Normally, if a country imports more than it exports, its currency weakens until the deficit corrects. But if you're the reserve currency, other countries need your currency anyway, so you can import more than you export indefinitely. America has run trade deficits for 50 years straight. We get real goods and give them printed currency. It's the best deal in history. Third, you export inflation. When you print money, normally that causes domestic inflation. But if you're the reserve currency, the world holds your currency. So they absorb the inflation. America printed $6 trillion in 2020 and 2021. That inflation was absorbed globally because everyone holds dollars. Reserve currency status is the most important economic privilege a nation can have. It's more valuable than natural resources, more valuable than a large population, more valuable than military power. Because it allows you to live beyond your means and have the world pay for it. The reserve currency can print money and the world accepts it. That's power. But that power doesn't last forever. 5 times in history, a currency has become the global reserve. And 5 times, it has collapsed. Every single one followed the same 9 stages. Let's trace the pattern. Here are the 9 stages explicitly. Stage 1, rise to dominance. A nation becomes an economic and military powerhouse. Usually through innovation, trade expansion, or military conquest. Their currency becomes widely used because everyone trades with them. Stage 2, currency adoption. Other nations start holding the currency in reserves and using it for trade. It becomes the standard, the reserve currency. Stage 3, golden age. The reserve nation experiences unprecedented prosperity. Wealth flows in. Living standards rise. It's the peak. Stage 4, overconfidence and overextension. The reserve nation believes its position is permanent. It overspends, expands militarily beyond what it can sustain, borrows heavily. The discipline that built the wealth disappears. Stage 5, structural imbalances. Trade deficits grow. The nation consumes more than it produces. Debt accumulates faster than GDP grows. The economy becomes financialized rather than productive. Stage 6, currency debasement. To pay for the spending, the nation prints money. The currency loses purchasing power. Inflation rises. Trust begins to erode. Stage 7, loss of confidence. Other nations start to question whether the currency is stable. They begin diversifying their reserves, slowly at first. They start using alternative currencies for trade. The reserve currency's share of global reserves starts falling. Stage 8, rapid decline. The loss of confidence accelerates. Countries actively move away from the currency. Reserves fall quickly. The reserve nation can no longer borrow cheaply. Trade deficits become unsustainable. The privileges of reserve status disappear. And stage 9, collapse and replacement. A new currency emerges as the reserve. The old reserve currency becomes just another currency. The nation that had the privilege can no longer print unlimited money. It has to live within its means like everyone else. The transition is painful. Living standards fall. The former reserve nation declines. That's the pattern. 9 stages from dominance to collapse. And it has happened 5 times. Let's watch it play out across 5 centuries of monetary history. The Portuguese real was the world's first truly global reserve currency. In the late 1400s and 1500s, Portugal led the age of exploration. Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498. Portugal established trade routes to Asia, Africa, and Brazil. They controlled the spice trade. Spices were the oil of that era, essential, expensive, and Portugal had a monopoly. Stage 1, rise to dominance. The Portuguese real became the currency of global trade because everyone needed to trade with Portugal for spices. Stage 2, currency adoption. By the early 1500s, the real was held by every trading nation. It was the standard for maritime commerce. Stage 3, Golden Age. Portugal grew incredibly wealthy. Lisbon became one of the richest cities in the world. The Portuguese Empire spanned continents. Stage 4, overconfidence. Portugal expanded militarily into Africa, Asia, and South America simultaneously. They fought wars on multiple fronts. They borrowed heavily from Italian and German bankers. Stage 5, structural imbalances. Portugal consumed luxury goods from around the world, but produced less and less. Trade deficits grew. They relied on imperial extraction rather than productive economy. Stage 6, currency debasement. By the late 1500s, Portugal was debasing the real, reducing the silver content, printing more currency to pay debts. Inflation rose. Stage 7, loss of confidence. By 1600, other nations, especially the Dutch and English, were challenging Portuguese trade dominance. Merchants started preferring Dutch guilders or Spanish silver. Stage 8, rapid decline. The Dutch defeated the Portuguese in sea battles, took over trade routes in Asia. By the 1640s, Portugal had lost most of its trading empire. The real was no longer widely used. Stage 9, collapse. By the 1700s, the real was a minor currency. The Dutch guilder had replaced it as the global standard. Portugal declined from superpower to peripheral European nation. The real followed all 9 stages from 1500 to 1700. 200 years of dominance, then collapse. While Portugal controlled spices, Spain controlled silver. The discovery of massive silver deposits in Mexico and Peru in the 1500s made Spain the richest nation on earth. The Spanish silver dollar, minted from New World silver, became the world's currency. Stage 1, rise to dominance. Spain had more silver than anyone. Every nation needed silver for coinage. The Spanish dollar was pure, consistent, and abundant. It became the global standard. Stage 2, currency adoption. By 1600, the Spanish dollar was used from Europe to Asia. Chinese merchants preferred Spanish silver. It was the most widely circulated currency in history up to that point. Stage 3, Golden Age. Spain, under Charles V and Philip II, was the dominant European power. Wealth flowed in from the New World. Stage 4, overconfidence. Spain fought constant wars against France, against the Netherlands, against England, against the Ottomans. Military spending exceeded silver revenues. Stage 5, structural imbalances. Spain imported manufactured goods from the rest of Europe and paid in silver. Spanish industry declined. They consumed but didn't produce. Stage 6, currency debasement. Spain debased the currency repeatedly. They mixed copper with silver. Inflation soared. By 1600, Spanish prices had quadrupled. Stage 7, loss of confidence. Other nations started minting their own silver coins. The Spanish dollar's dominance weakened. Stage 8, rapid decline. Spain declared bankruptcy 4 times. 1557, 1575, 1596, 1607. Lenders stopped trusting Spanish credit. By 1700, Spain was a declining power. Stage 9, collapse. By the 1800s, the Spanish dollar was replaced by the British pound as the global reserve. Spain went from dominant empire to minor European nation. The Spanish dollar followed all 9 stages over 3 centuries. The Dutch guilder became the reserve currency of the 1600s and 1700s through trade dominance. Stage 1, the Dutch Republic in the 1600s was the trading center of the world. Amsterdam was the financial capital. The Dutch East India Company was the most powerful corporation in history. The guilder was the currency of global commerce. Stage 2, currency adoption. By 1650, the guilder was held by every trading nation. Bills of exchange were denominated in guilders. It was the standard. Stage 3, Golden Age. The Dutch Republic experienced unprecedented prosperity. Amsterdam's canals, art, science flourished. It was the richest nation per capita. Stage 4, overconfidence. The Dutch fought multiple wars, against England in 3 Anglo-Dutch wars, against France under Louis XIV. Naval wars were expensive. Stage 5, structural imbalances. The Dutch East India Company became overleveraged. Trade profits declined. The Republic borrowed to maintain its position. Stage 6, currency debasement. By the 1700s, the guilder was being debased. Confidence eroded. Stage 7, loss of confidence. The British and French challenged Dutch trade dominance. London overtook Amsterdam as the financial center. Stage 8, rapid decline. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War in 1780 devastated the Dutch economy. The VOC collapsed in 1799. Stage 9, collapse. By 1815, after the Napoleonic Wars, the British pound was the undisputed global reserve. The guilder became a regional currency. The Dutch went from the richest nation to a minor power. 9 stages, 2 centuries. The British pound had the longest run as reserve currency. Nearly 2 centuries. Stage 1, rise to dominance. Britain led the Industrial Revolution. By 1815, after defeating Napoleon, Britain was the world's dominant power. The pound, backed by gold, became the global standard. Stage 2, currency adoption. The gold standard meant every currency was pegged to gold, but the pound was the most trusted. By 1850, over half of global trade was denominated in pounds. Stage 3, Golden Age. The Victorian era was Britain's peak. The empire covered a quarter of the earth. London was the world's financial center. Britain was the wealthiest nation. Stage 4, overconfidence. By 1900, Britain was overextended. The empire was expensive to maintain. Military spending was massive. They believed their dominance was permanent. Stage 5, structural imbalances. Britain started running trade deficits in the late 1800s. They imported more than they exported. The industrial advantage was disappearing. Germany and America were outproducing Britain. Stage 6, currency debasement. World War I forced Britain to print money and borrow heavily. They went off the gold standard in 1914. Debt exploded. By 1918, Britain owed massive amounts to the United States. Stage 7, loss of confidence. After WWI, the US dollar started challenging the pound. By the 1930s, countries held both pounds and dollars. Britain tried to return to gold in 1925, but had to abandon it again in 1931. Confidence was broken. Stage 8, rapid decline. World War II destroyed Britain's finances. They borrowed massively from the US. By 1945, Britain was broke. The US was now the dominant economic power. The Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 made the dollar the reserve currency, backed by gold. The pound was demoted to secondary status. Over the next 25 years, Britain devalued the pound multiple times, lost the empire, entered economic decline. Stage 9, collapse. In 1971, when Nixon ended the dollar's gold backing, the pound fully lost any reserve status. It became just another floating currency. Britain went from ruling a quarter of the world to a medium-sized European economy. The pound followed all 9 stages from 1815 to 1971, 156 years. The longest reserve currency in history, and even it collapsed. Now let's trace the dollar through the 9 stages and see where we are. Stage 1, rise to dominance. After World War II, the US was the only major economy left standing. We had half the world's manufacturing capacity. We held most of the world's gold. The dollar, backed by gold at $35 per ounce, became the global reserve under the Bretton Woods system in 1944. Stage 2, currency adoption. By the 1950s, every nation held dollars. All international trade was in dollars. The dollar was as good as gold because it was backed by gold. Stage 3, Golden Age. The 1950s and 60s were America's peak. Middle-class prosperity, manufacturing dominance, infrastructure built. Standards of living rose faster than any time in history. The American dream was real. Stage 4, overconfidence and overextension. The Vietnam War and Great Society programs in the 1960s cost more than the U.S. could afford. Military bases in over 100 countries. Wars in Korea, Vietnam. Social programs expanding. We started borrowing and printing money. We believed our dominance was permanent. Stage 5, structural imbalances. By the late 1960s, America was running trade deficits. We were consuming more than producing. Manufacturing was moving overseas. The economy was starting to shift from production to consumption. Other countries, especially Germany and Japan, were outcompeting us in manufacturing. Stage 6, currency debasement. By 1971, we had printed so many dollars that we couldn't back them with gold anymore. Other countries were exchanging dollars for gold. Fort Knox was being drained. So Nixon ended the gold standard in August 1971. The dollar became pure fiat currency, backed by nothing except trust. This should have been the end, but America did something brilliant. In 1974, Kissinger negotiated the petrodollar system with Saudi Arabia. Oil would only be sold in dollars. This created artificial demand. Every country needed dollars to buy oil. The dollar remained the reserve currency, not because it was backed by gold, but because it was backed by oil. For 50 years, from 1974 to 2024, the petrodollar system sustained dollar dominance. But it also allowed America to continue stage 5 and 6 behaviors without consequences. From 1971 to 2025, we've been in stage 5 and 6 simultaneously. Trade deficits have grown every year since 1976. We now import $800 billion more than we export annually. Debt has exploded from $1 trillion in 1980 to $36 trillion today. And we've printed money relentlessly, $6 trillion in just 2020 and 2021 alone. The money supply has expanded by 40% in 2 years. This is currency debasement on a massive scale. But because the world needed dollars for oil, they absorbed it. Until now. Stage 7, loss of confidence. This began in the 2000s, but accelerated dramatically after 2020. China and Russia started trading in their own currencies. The European Union explored alternatives. Countries started buying gold at record rates. Gold reserves in central banks have increased every year since 2010. By 2020, the dollar's share of global reserves had fallen from 73% in 2000 to 59%. That's a massive drop. And it's accelerating. By 2024, dollar reserves are under 55%. We're losing reserve status in real time. Stage 8, rapid decline. This is where we are right now. June 9th, 2024, the petrodollar agreement expired. Saudi Arabia is now selling oil in yuan, rupees, euros. The artificial demand for dollars is disappearing. BRICS nations, representing nearly half the global population, are building alternative payment systems. The M-Bridge system lets countries settle trade in their own currencies without using dollars. China is pushing the yuan for international trade. Russia and India trade in rupees. Iran and China use yuan. 20% of global oil trade now settles in non-dollar currencies. That percentage is growing monthly. The consequences of Stage 8 are showing up. U.S. borrowing costs are rising. Treasury yields are higher than they have been in decades. The U.S. government is paying over $1 trillion per year just in interest on the debt. That's the largest line item in the federal budget. As demand for dollars falls, demand for treasuries falls, which means interest rates have to rise to attract buyers, which means debt service costs explode. It's a spiral. And inflation is staying persistent. 4% despite the most aggressive Fed rate hikes in history. Why? Because we can't export inflation anymore. The world doesn't want to hold as many dollars, so the inflation we create stays domestic. Stage 8 historically lasts 5 to 15 years. The British pound entered Stage 8 in 1945, when Britain was clearly broke after WWE tournament. By 1971, the pound had lost reserve status, 26 years. The dollar entered Stage 8 around 2020, when the petrodollar system started breaking and dollar reserves started falling faster. We're 5 years in, which means we have potentially 5 to 10 years before Stage 9, before the dollar is no longer the reserve currency. Stage 9 is collapse and replacement. The reserve currency loses its status and a new one takes over. So what does Stage 9 look like for the dollar and for America? First, the dollar becomes just another currency. No special global demand, no ability to run unlimited trade deficits, no ability to print money and have the world absorb it. We have to balance our budget like every other country. That means massive spending cuts or massive tax increases or both. The political fight will be brutal. Second, borrowing costs spike. If there's no automatic demand for treasuries, interest rates have to rise significantly to attract buyers. Debt service could go from $1 trillion per year to $3 or $4 trillion. That's unsustainable. Either we default on debt or we print money to pay it, which causes hyperinflation. Both options are catastrophic. Third, living standards fall dramatically. Americans have lived beyond their means for 50 years by importing more than we export and paying in printed dollars. So when that privilege ends, imports become expensive. Everything made overseas costs more. The cost of living rises while incomes don't. The middle-class standard of living falls to match our actual productivity, which is much lower than current consumption. Fourth, the financial system is disrupted. The entire global financial system is built on dollar dominance. Trillions in derivatives, loans, and contracts are denominated in dollars. When the dollar loses reserve status, all those contracts reprice. Financial institutions holding dollar assets face losses. Banks could fail. Credit could freeze. A global financial crisis is possible. Fifth, America's global influence declines. Reserve currency status was the foundation of American power, more important than the military. Lose that, and we become a regional power, not a global superpower, like Britain after 1971. Still important, but not dominant. What replaces the dollar? There are several possibilities. One, the Chinese yuan. China is actively preparing for this. But the yuan has problems. Capital controls and a lack of trust in Chinese institutions, not fully convertible. It's not ready yet. Two, a basket of currencies. No single reserve, but multiple currencies used for trade. Dollar, yen, euro, all used depending on the trade. This is actually most likely in the near term, a multipolar currency system. Three, gold. Central banks are buying gold at record rates. In a crisis, gold could become the anchor again, a return to some form of gold standard. Four, a new Bretton Woods agreement. Nations come together to create a new reserve system, possibly IMF special drawing rights or a new synthetic currency. We don't know which system replaces the dollar, but we know the dollar's reserve status is ending. Stage 8 is in progress. Stage 9 is ahead. The timeline is 5 to 10 years. Maybe less if there's a crisis that accelerates it. And when it happens, America will experience the same decline every former reserve currency nation has experienced. Britain went from global empire to medium European power in one generation. America will go from sole superpower to one power among many. The privilege is ending. The pattern always completes. 5 reserve currencies over 500 years. Portuguese real, Spanish silver dollar, Dutch guilder, British pound, US dollar. All of them followed the same 9-stage pattern. All of them believed they were different. All of them believed their dominance was permanent. All of them collapsed. Rise to dominance, currency adoption, golden age, overconfidence, structural imbalances, currency debasement, loss of confidence, rapid decline, collapse. The pattern is perfect. 9 stages, 5 currencies. 5 collapses, 100%. The United States dollar is at stage 8, rapid decline. Dollar reserves falling. Petrodollar system ended. Alternative currencies rising. BRICS building parallel systems. Borrowing costs spiking. Inflation persistent. All the signs of stage 8. Stage 9 is collapse. Historical timeline from stage 8 to stage 9 is 5 to 15 years. The dollar entered stage 8 around 2020. We're 5 years in. The privilege that built modern America, the ability to print unlimited money and have the world accept it, is ending. Not in decades, in years. If this gave you a different perspective on the dollar's future and America's economic trajectory, subscribe. Because as this transition unfolds, as we move from stage 8 to stage 9, as the dollar loses reserve status, you'll want to understand what's happening and why. 5 currencies, 9 stages, 100% collapse rate. The pattern never fails, and the dollar is next.